Our management and planning session. Today is Thursday, April the 7th. All council members are present, town attorney, town manager, town clerk, a few members of the public, and we'll stand with and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll get right into it. The first item is, for discussion, is the beach renourishment update. Chad?
Morning, everyone. Chad Schutz, environmental staff for the town of Fort Myers Beach.
Morning.
So we have a presentation here on the picture.
It's coming. I get closer. Get closer to the mic.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so I thought it may be wise to just give some educational presentation regarding the erosion control line versus a critically eroded shoreline designation. So I will go through some slides.
Say, Chad.
Yes, sir.
First of all, good morning. Just to sort of set the table for this, would you just sort of in lay terms help us understand better the difference between the mean high water line and the erosion control line from a practical standpoint?
So the erosion control line and the mean high water line are one and the same at the time the survey is done. So the erosion control line equals the mean high water line, and that's what we're taking a survey of and recording as a property line, which we'll get into.
But I think an important distinction is the erosion control line is set down at a certain point in time and becomes a property line.
Right.
Everything seaward of that becomes the state's through natural accretion or through beach renourishment.
And that was the erosion control line?
Right.
And so the mean high tide line,
Varies with time. So if you go and do a beach renourishment, then the mean high water line will actually move seaward because there's more sand there. But
gotcha, okay, I'm following. Yep.
And
So the
I know Chad is going to get to this probably, but both of these determinations are not done by the town. They're done by the Department of Environmental Protection or the state of Florida through the Department of Environmental Protection. The designations of a critically eroded beach, again, is done by the state. And then once a beach renourishment project has been completed, particularly if there was the use of state funds, which we're doing, then as a condition of the joint coastal permit, that is the permit that allows for these projects to move forward, a standard condition in every JCP that is issued by the state is that within 6 months of completion of the project, the ECL determination has to be done through a survey. That's a standard condition.
And John, is the ECL done by the state on a regular basis, or is it triggered by a renourishment permit request?
So if I can just interrupt, so
Yep.
we do the ECL. The town's gonna
We'll hire the
hire a
surveyor.
consultant
Yeah.
to do the ECL. So just to address your question, the ECL is set in time, or at the time the mean high water.
Snapshot of time.
Right, snapshot in time, and it will stay there. The mean high water, as you know, will go in with erosion or out with accretion, and it is just an elevation of the shoreline where a measure of where the tide is at high tide most of the time.
And Chad, you say that the town will hire a surveyor to do the ECL assessment. Is that being triggered by the beach renourishment permit process that we're engaged in, or is that just something we do on a regular basis?
For one segment, and I'll get to that, and I was gonna ask if it pleases the council, if I can just go through my presentation and try and get one complete dialogue going, and then we can
Well,
get.
I was
Starting to wonder whose presentation it was.
I was just asking because I wanted to make sure I understood your presentation better, just to sort of set the table a little bit, just
Yes,
get
sir.
some
I
of these
understand.
terms.
I
Yeah.
understand.
Okay, thank you. You please go ahead. Please proceed.
Okay, so the erosion control line establishes a property line between the upland beachfront property owners and state lands. So what the state owns and what the single-family home owner or the condo owns to that property line. It is a survey of the mean high water line within 6 months of construction of the beach. So within 6 months of when we start dredging sand from the borough area to the beach. And it is required whenever a beach renourishment project advances the mean high water line, meaning we are adding sand to the beach, it's going to increase the elevation and go out into the Gulf. Therefore, the mean high water line is also going to go out towards the Gulf. So the beach will be, instead of being right at the seawall at Leonardo Arms, is going to be 200 feet plus, should the renourishment project happen.
Okay.
So there's a series of tasks required to establish the ECL, erosion control line, a mean high water survey, like we just mentioned at the time, or 6 months before construction. They will then have a local workshop and hearing for the public, and then it's recorded in the county clerk of courts to establish that property line. This process takes about 6 months to accomplish. So the town has had two ECL segments established in the past. If you can zoom in on that purple line, I know it's hard to see. I didn't like this picture, but it's one of the better ones that I had for showing both segments. You have one from Bowditch to Lanark, which is R175 to R198, who are familiar with the R monuments. And that ECL is still intact today. There's another one that was established from Tarpon Road to the Big Carlos Pass Bridge, 208.5 to R210, and that one has since been rescinded and no longer is a property line over there as that beach accretes.
Now, just as a point here, so the ECO was created for the Renourishment project that happened, what, 10 years ago? Was it 11 years ago?
Yes, sir.
And the renourishment will only happen for less than half of that, but the entire ECL is still there,
It is still there, has not been rescinded. No one has,
as requested it.
well, I can't say no one. Not more than 50% plus one of the property owners along that ECL have requested it to be rescinded, for it to be rescinded.
Or 50% of the actual, the linear distance. I think if I read in the,
Is it? Okay, stand corrected. Okay, so this just shows the ECL that's still intact, again, from Bowditch Point on the north, about 2/3 of the island southeast to Lanark, or thereabouts, maybe Gulf Road, somewhere around there. This is a picture of the old survey showing the beach as it was then. As you all know, it's accreted considerably since then, but from Tarpon Road to Big Carlos Pass Bridge, and those property owners were successful in getting that rescinded. I know this has been said several times, but just to reiterate, so the only shoreline segment proposed to establish an erosion control line is in the critical wildlife area.
Chad, could you just go back for a second? When you said the property owners got it rescinded, explain what that process is and why would somebody do that?
So I'm not an expert on the matter, but my understanding is there's a petition to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to have that rescinded. I can provide details.
No, I was just curious, would they do that because they wanted a new one that better reflected the realities of today, or would they just want it to go away?
My understanding is they saw it as there was maybe had been some debate as to where that sand had come from. It was natural accretion, which is within their property rights to continue to own to the Gulf, and they saw it as government doing a land grab to establish a property line on beach that they own.
Okay.
because if you put down an ECL and you're beach is accreting. Without the ECL, the property line goes to the mean high water line. With the ECL, it stops at the ECL, even if there was no active renourishment there.
Okay.
So again, this is where staff, the only proposed shoreline segment to establish an ECL, critical wildlife area, basically from Cresciente to Sun Caper, thereabouts. So to shift gears,
Chad,
repeat that one
let's
more
go, let's spend one more minute on that,
yes, sir.
all right?
Right.
Because, we received emails from folks who indicated their desire not to be included in this area.
Was that in this area or further?
Are we referring to Island Winds?
Well, I want to be clear that the folks who've been in contact with us are or not in this area.
Correct, they're not in this area.
Okay.
Now, do you still need, I mean, a lot of this is critical wildlife area?
Yes, sir, this entire segment is within the critical wildlife area.
And do you need an ECL when, isn't that essentially state land versus state land?
As of today, the state does consider it state lands, and the information as I started on this project and worked with FDEP was that this was state lands, would not require an ECL, and would be 100% funded by the FDEP for the construction cost. However, in our request for additional information from FDEP, they did ask for an ECL in lieu of the outcome of litigation for that state lands boundary line.
And would that ECL go away if that lawsuit was in the state's favor?
There's no ECL right now. There
If you placed one?
is a survey. So there's no ECL to go away right now. There is a survey of a mean high water line, I believe in 2007, that exists but was not recorded. If an ECL was established and recorded, it would exist in time unless it got rescinded by the property owners through whatever processes are available for that.
So Council Beach, so the state could ask itself if it wanted to rescind the line. I
And if it's
guess.
got 100% of the linear feet, then it wouldn't really,
So they're,
it'd just be a,
be looking in the mirror and asking themselves if they wanted to
Right.
shave.
So, John, I have a question for you on this then.
Yes, sir.
Based on what we just talked about or what was just explained to us, should the lawsuit go the opposite direction and it loses the CWA, would the property owners then have any right to just, how would this line, what would happen with the line, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because it would say that it was shown that it's not the state land, would this then go away, or because it was put in place before then? I mean, would there be an argument that the homeowners could say that, this was put on our property without our permission?
Possibly. I really, it would be hard for me to necessarily speculate as to what might be in the minds of the property owners, frankly. The issue that, as I have always seen it, and I've explained to this town council, is that it doesn't matter where the line is and who owns the uplands or not, and whether it's in the CWA or not. It's a function, issues of what happens in that area are subject to local regulation and compliance with our rules and regulations as they relate to development within the EC zoning district. But that's a completely separate issue. The issue of ownership, of where the state's ownership ends and the private ownership starts, really is a dispute between the state and those individual property owners. And it's not necessarily the town doesn't have dog in the fight, so to speak, because it's a state ownership versus private property ownership issue. We're not making a claim to necessarily to any of the portion of the beach.
And John, if the litigants are successful in their litigation, it doesn't necessarily revoke the CWA, correct?
But that would, be up to the state to take that position or to reestablish it,
Yeah.
so.
But if they did succeed, then we'd be playing catch-up, maybe having to get easements from them?
Well, not necessarily, because don't forget, this is, as I understand it, this is a lawsuit brought by one lot owner. So if they are successful, that doesn't necessarily mean the whole CWA goes away. That just means a portion that's in dispute goes away, and all the rest of it would, I assume, would remain in CWA. I don't think the state would abandon all the rest of it. Now, whether other property owners might follow along and do a similar lawsuit and be successful, that could be years in resolving itself.
And do we have a timeline on that?
Last I checked, the matter is scheduled to proceed to trial this summer. But whether or not that holds true depends upon the parties, the status of discovery, and the availability of the court.
Okay, Chad. Let's continue.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that with regards to the benefit versus the cost to the town of the CWA is millions of dollars in construction funding that would come from FDP if the CWA does stay intact, that the town would not and the county would not have to pay for.
Right.
So this is the only ECL you'd be adding, because the other one's already in place, right?
Correct.
So you may not have to do any E ECL.
That would be the simplest solution. Okay. So shifting gears, critically eroded designation. Every year, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection publishes a report. The last one came out, I believe, in July 2021, and it covers 825 miles of sandy beaches and inlets across the entire state.
So this is like most of Florida. Beaches are critically eroded.
I should know this, but I'm not sure how many miles of shoreline Florida has, or how many miles of beach or sandy beaches that Florida has, but it does look like a lot. So this is just the definition according to Florida Administrative Code, defining what a critically eroded shoreline designation means. The key terms are it's recognized as eroding or recession of the beach and dune system, or there's peripheral gaps identified in between critically eroded areas, and the designation is necessary for continuity of management of the coastal system or for the design integrity of the adjacent beach management projects.
And that's right out of the Florida Administrative Code.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So for Fort Myers Beach, Estero Island, we have R175. That negative just means it goes out a little bit further north and to R200. And then you can see there's a gap, and then we have R203 to R207. So for that northern designation, that's from Bowditch to Carousel. Which is noted as that, again, that R175 to the R200 on the south. Zoom in on each one of those, the beginning and end points. And then again, in the critical wildlife area, there's a segment R203 to R207 Cresciente condominiums to the Sun Caper condominiums or thereabouts. And a zoom in of that gap, as you can see, from R200 to R203, which again is from Carousel going south to Cresciente is the gap. So why did I do this? My first summer here, started seeing that there's this ponding issue and noticing the results from that.
This is seasonal, it's usually in the summer, right?
Correct, yeah, so the pond can happen, extreme rain events, if we get an inch or two or three, or a storm can overwash and then flood that area as well. So it becomes basically a very large bird bath. I haven't done any bacterial readings, but it would seem that it would be a public health and safety issues for people with open cuts on their feet. In addition, large portions of that beach are not available for recreation during those months. And this ponding did last until late November, I believe almost until Thanksgiving last year.
Chad, where did this picture, with the, looks like a river that goes through there, where was this picture taken? R what, roughly?
I would say around R202, but the flooding area can go all the way from R200 to R202, can be covered with water.
If I could interject here, I visited that section when this is occurring, and the picture does not show the depth of this area. I tried to cross it. The water was moving extremely fast and came up to my neck. I abandoned my effort to cross that trench and went back. It didn't look that deep. So when we're using the word ponding here, this trench that then the water uses to get out is not a tranquil pond that's a few inches deep.
Yep, I would agree that if, yeah, I did caution, especially elderly that are walking across that could get swept very easily.
To your neck?
Yes,
Wow.
that's how deep it was, and the water was moving very fast.
Yeah, I was actually there when that happened. I took a bunch of pictures of it at the time because I was walking the beach, and I talked to a buddy of mine who was on the board at Cresciente at the time, and I'm sorry, Sanderac, and he said when this happened, it looked like he thought one of the vendors dug a little trench to let the water out, one of the chair vendors, and they lost, I don't know how many tons of beautiful sand, because the sandcastle competition has been here for years, and all that beautiful sand from the sandcastle competition just pours out into the ocean. And I think they were pretty distraught about how that trench was handled. And so, but it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenging issue that does pool up every summer and because of the rains but keep going.
I was just gonna ask you to put that back up. Did this happen over one night, or was this an accumulation of days?
My understanding is, I'll call them kids because I'm an older guy now. I'm not sure how old they were. They may have been 20 years old. Either did it on their own volition or maybe were encouraged to do it. Some trenching, basically a narrow trench was dug, and a trench went from inches wide to, several yards, if not more, over the course of that morning as it drained.
And
And
it's
it's happened-
happened on more than one occasion.
But this
multiple
particular
years.
picture- yeah, this
Every year
particular
since I've been
picture was throughout the day, but it did start with this tiny little trench, and then it was magnified dramatically after the water started to take.
So it was started by man-made issues, not
Yes, sir.
Mother Nature?
Yes, sir. It can also happen naturally, but this particular occurrence I think 2 years, my first year and the second year, 2019 and 2020, appear to be anthropogenic man-made. And then it's also goes out on the R200 side, on the outrigger side, it can either meander its way or be encouraged out through that way. And that's why you kind of had like a trench there, because the sand, all the sand that it pulled out with it, it caused like a sandbar over there. And so for a year or so, we kind of had that near shore sandbar.
But it has happened on more than one
Multiple
year.
years. Every year I've been
Multiple
here.
years it
Yep.
has happened. It's not like this has happened once.
Well, you know, there's an accumulation of water, and when you surpass the ability to, that water to be absorbed in the sand, it's gonna go somewhere. Eventually you build up, and this is not the only place on the beach that does this. I know that there was a case, a summer or two ago, where at the Diamond Head, they have an area where it pools, and their vendor went and dug a channel, and then that channel became a pretty good-sized trough. Again, it's an area though where they rake.
Okay.
Okay.
So again, getting back to the question as to why staff did this, it actually wasn't an original idea. Whenever I was talking about the issues and with some experts in the field, I was actually informed that a condo had actually sought to fill the pond themselves. So there's a technical report back from 2017 from engineers showing, you know, how much volume of sand would be required to fill that area to give it the proper slope for positive drainage or for positive slope for drainage, and to alleviate the ponding issues. My understanding is they didn't pursue that due to cost.
Did you know what the cost was? And was this for the entire area or just a bit in front of theirs?
I don't remember what it was back then. I do have a slide coming up showing what it will be now.
And this is done by truck, which is a fairly expensive way, I think, to get.
Correct. So this is just a quote from FDEP. So the only real effect of critically eroded beach designation by the department is that it makes the area of beach eligible for state funding and for a local government to pursue state funding for a proposed beach project through the local government funding request process within the department's beach management funding assistance program. It does not affect property boundaries.
But Chad, doesn't this, I think some of the concerns that we've heard, if I'm not mistaken, is that by doing this, does it then trigger local codes as far as vegetation having to be planted, height of vegetation, blocking views, things of that nature?
The designation does not. If sand gets placed, if property owners feel that they want this and they want sand there, that is the trigger. The designation itself does not.
So if they decide that they don't want sand, they would not be required to have vegetation?
Correct.
And one thing I want to clarify, because I think what they said, what some of the property owners there said wasn't really true, is that the requirement now, if you correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, is 80% of the width of the lot, but only 15% deep. So it's not 80% of the entire area.
So it's, our managed beach zone document is 75%. I know Lee County has been mentioning 80%, and I'm going to get clarification on that, but 80%, 80% of the width, and I don't think anybody's going to get out there with the tape measure, but 75 to 85% of the width, and then 15 feet deep. So not percent, but 15 feet deep.
So the 800 feet of beach, only 15 feet of that would be required to have plants.
But how close or how far from the property is the requirements? What's the height of the vegetation? Can you just talk about some of that?
Sure. Just going back to the project that was done 10 years ago, different strokes for different folks. Some wanted it right next to their condo. Others wanted to put it out to the ECL, which again is that property line on their side of the ECL. So the land that they own would be the requirement, and that would enable them to have, you know, a private area, maybe area where they have some beach furniture storage, because our definition of the beach is the sand that is from the mean low water line, the wet sand, to the seaward line of vegetation, or so up to that dune. So behind that dune, theoretically, the turtles shouldn't be getting back there. It's not defined as beach, quote unquote, by our code. So it does offer some amenities if they put it out to the ECL or anywhere there in between.
And what kind of height of the vegetation are we talking about? Because there was some concerns that it's gonna block the views and.
Sure. So there's 3 different vegetation recipes, if you will. Each are 3 species. Some are more CO heavy. Some are, they call it a low dune profile mix of species. And I can share that with council.
Chad, in lay terms, are we talking grass, or are we talking giant, shrubs and bushes and things?
Grasses and forbs. So, but mostly grasses. It could be like a dune daisy.
And most of it's probably, I'd say, within a foot and a half height. The tassels of the coats go higher.
Right.
But that's pretty much it. If I think the further back from the water that you go, the larger they can be. If you get like grapes and things, and the closer you get to the water, the more naturally stunted everything becomes.
Right. And the benefit of that managed beach zone policy that was, I guess the right word would be, enacted by council a decade ago, is that it encourages the property owners to be stewards, so they can somewhat manage the species mix and take out exotics, for instance, that they don't want, or trim. So trim is defined as up to 25% of the foliage, and keep it in Ms. Champ's words, kind of like their beach garden, but we want to keep only dune vegetation in there to that point.
I don't know how my fellow councilors feel about it, but I think this would be valuable information to get out to the public. Maybe some examples of what this vegetation would be. There could be some miscommunication or misunderstanding of, these have to be big palm trees, these have to be big bushes, these have to, it'd be nice for the public to be able to see what kind of vegetation that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
To maybe better help educate some people that don't know exactly what we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to, one second. There are examples of that. North of the pier, up on North Estero Boulevard, there were property owners up there that also resisted this idea of dunes very heavily, until they finally acquiesced and had these dunes built. And they immediately saw the benefits of having these dunes. And the objection of the landscaping and how they were planted was non-existent after they came about. And it's my understanding that those dunes were damaged during Irma, and those property owners can't wait to get their dunes back. And so there is another side to the story, and that does have to get out. And as a matter of fact, the folks at Island Winds, they know the people that I'm talking about up there. That's Mr. Ron Landisi up there at Dolphin Watch, who was the former head of the Condo Association of Fort Myers Beach, and he will give testimony to the benefits of that dune, and the objection of the plantings and the landscaping of the dunes is really not an issue once it gets done. And but again, it's all a part of being educated and seeing these things, talking to people that have been through the process, and going forward with it. So I would encourage everybody to go up there and speak to these people, and speak to the people that maintain these dunes, and that are the professionals in the field, and let them give you a little more education as well. Thank you.
And in 2013, the Marine Resources Task Force did a dune planting demonstration area. So it's on Connecticut Street, and it's one property to the left as you come out, 2 properties to the right, and the town property. And those were done with one of the formulas, it was dictated. Since then, some of those plants didn't make it, others did, and others have been added. But it's now got probably 20 different dune plants in that area. So if you want to see what the town did 9 years ago and what's happened to it, how big it's become, then it's a demonstration project, and that's where it's located.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
since you mentioned Mr. Landisi, that group still gets together periodically, and we're on their calendar, I believe, to go speak to the condo presidents / representatives who attend that meeting for the purposes of sharing the information today and whatever other information town council thinks would be appropriate to bring to their attention.
Good. Good. Education is the key. All right, Chad, you want to continue?
So just one last slide. Councilor Veach was asking about pricing. These are the engineers, I think they call it probable cost estimates. The percentages you see are based on, in round figures, the amount of sand that's going to be pumped onto each one of these segments. The north segment is, and looking at this, I think I got my colors mixed up on the north is the green in the picture. So apologize for that. But so the north segment is the previously constructed project, and it, as you can see, about 30%. And it obviously needs a lot more sand than the central segment, which is much longer but about the same amount of sand. And that's because the central segment's benefiting from the Matanzas Pass dredge spoils that have been placed near shore over the last decade or so.
And a lot of it is accreted anyway. You can't identify necessarily where the sand came from, but a lot of that area has been accreting.
Right. So, and some of that central section does get a little bit skinny towards Newton Park. And then you have the pond area, which is a relatively minor portion of the project. And again, it's not necessarily erosion concern, it's just would be nice to have, should the property owners agree. And then on the south is the red CWA area, Leonardo Arms, Stero Beach and Tennis Club, Bermuda Dunes, probably seeing the worst of the erosion effects. So the priorities here are the north and the south in terms of erosion.
Chad, with the ponding area that you're talking about, I mean, it's still a significant amount of money at 1.4 million, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a smaller number compared to the other sections. What portion of that would be the town's, should that not be included in the critically eroded?
So we're still negotiating with Lee County on that. If it were based on the previous project, I want to say 12%, but I think that's the match. So if let me come back to you with an exact percent, but I can give you the numbers. I believe I've shown it in the past, and I apologize for not having that. I could pull it up on my computer and show you shortly if you wish.
Yeah, I'd just like to know an exact number if you could. That'd be
Right. So if the state, and again, this all depends on the outcome of the CWA, but if the state is contributing in the 40% and the TDC is contributing in the 40-45%, to match, because they're going to be fairly similar. Again, depending on the CWA outcome, and then the town is around that 12%. But again, that depends on a recreation versus storm benefit analysis that we still need to come to agreement on, and the outcome of the CWA.
I guess maybe now that you just said that, maybe I worded my question incorrectly. So let's just assume for a minute that it is the way it is now. What would be the town's portion to pay to include what we need to include there to fix that, if it doesn't get added into the federal funds?
I can, State funds. It would be.
State funds, sorry.
It would be, let me come back to it, and
Okay.
I can give you a more accurate number, rather than saying something that might not be accurate.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Are you talking about the ponding area or?
Yeah, the ponding area, just-
CWA area, or both?
Kind of both, I guess, would be,
Okay, I just wanted to be sure we had the
Yeah.
right question, so we had to give you the right answer.
yeah, I probably went around the, well, you guys know the analogy, I'll save it for later.
But there is one really important distinction that I see, is that when the whole way the ECL works is you lay down the ECL line, and then you're putting sand down, and it becomes state land. So the state's paying basically to put sand, their share, to put sand on state land. In this ponding area, the sand is going on private property.
So that's, sand goes, the state is paying their share for all the sand. There's no necessarily distinction on private versus public. And,
But you
you know,
mentioned,
in any renourishment, you will put sand, some on private, but mostly on public, the shoreward side of the ECL.
and you also mentioned the distinction of storm protection versus recreation. Now, but in that, are you asking for any contributions from the property owners in this area where the ponding is?
No, sir, I'm not asking anyone for anybody. That's-
Well, just, is it part of the equation? Because you mentioned there was one property owner that was looking at paying for it 100% and just getting the permit to do it, and they backed out because of cost. But
As-
now we've got a lot of other funding mechanisms that are going into this.
Well, correct. You know, the reason we're doing this is for a couple of reasons. So sort of step back and look. One is, and I think it was Council Adderholt made the point at some prior meeting, that being able to walk and enjoy the entire length of the beach is something that should be very important to everybody. So that's part A. Part B is that, let's not forget that to do this entire project is $22.5 million in current estimated numbers. Our share is roughly 15.5% in town contribution towards that $22.5 million, or roughly $3.5 million. So, we're, getting the significant part of the funding from the state and Lee County / TDC to do this work. But there are criteria we have to meet to do that. And we're working hard to achieve the highest level of criteria to get the most favorable funding formula for the town's benefit. Now, there are other things that are going on, because, the world spins while we're working at our desks here, and properties may or may not fall in, people may or may not want to participate, and things can happen. But we're hopeful that as more and more facts come out through workshops like this, and Chad going to the condo board and one-on-one conversations, and hopefully you and our MRF committee will help us get the word out too, through its meetings and both group and individual, that if we're successful, we can once again make not just portions of Fort Myers Beach, but the entire beach up there where we want to be, so that when people mention the best beaches in Florida, we're not an afterthought, but we're a forethought. We're one of the top 1, 2, or 3. And that's what our objective is, and we're very hopeful that people will continue to ask questions, nothing wrong with that, get their questions answered, understand the project a little better, and in time, see the benefits to all. And that's what we're really trying to go. So we embrace your questions, we embrace the community's questions. People have emailed me, I've emailed them back information in a day or two to try to make sure that everyone has the best possible information so that they can understand the breadth and scope of this project and cost, and hopefully also understand the huge benefit and the fact that we're trying to find a way to do this where a significant part of the funding is being provided by others.
Speaking of that, Roger, if you have been getting some questions about, it is a lot of money, how is the funding gonna take place as far as who's paying for what, how they're paying for it? Are we carrying the load and getting paid back? Can you just touch on how it's going to be funded? Should everything go as it's proceeding now?
Well, one of the challenges is that the nature of this work requires a significant amount of upfront costs. And in fact, the cost for the first month of an estimated 9-month project exceeds the entire town's contribution. So what that means is that we can't do it on a typical, we spend the money and we get a reimbursement. And then, we replenish the pot of money and then we spend the money and we get a reimbursement. Because the money won't move fast enough to meet that cycling capability. So we're in conversations with Lee County and others to see if they could help us front-end that money. So it won't be every month, won't be, 15% to us and X% to the county and X% to the state, but rather they'll front-end their money on the first couple of months and they'll put less in the back end once the gears start turning, because the reimbursement process can take 4 months. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it's not only the percentage that each party is contributing overall, but it's when they're contributing, it still has to be worked out.
Thank you.
And what is the town's annual budget? Just remind me from last year. Total.
Well, I think what we were really talking about is a general fund budget per se. So it's, in the neighborhood of like $4 million of new money.
No, but just as a comparison. What is the total budget of the town? What was it last budget cycle?
Oh, I don't remember with everything, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know the number off the top of my
I
head.
thought it was around 20 million.
It is, but that includes carryover money and a lot of other things, so, I don't know that that's necessarily an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that if you look at the general fund part versus the potential town's cost of this project, that would be more of an apples to apples.
And the last time this was managed by the county, and because the county was putting the money up front, and we were contributing like everyone else, but now they stopped doing that, and we're the ones who are managing the project.
Well, I think they pointed out that the paradigm has shifted in this 10-year period, and if that's true, it has. But, what we're trying to convince them is if the amount you're contributing isn't really changing, it's just when you contribute, we're hopeful that they'll see that that's the only way to make this project be aerodynamic.
I would just take a second to piggyback on what Roger just talked about in terms of, I like to call it the democratization of the beach. We have all these beach access points, which allow the public throughout the island to have access to our beaches, which is wonderful. But since I've been here, which hasn't been all that long, but you've always been able to transverse or transit the beach from the south point to the north point. And you could walk, bike, run. People every morning, every evening throughout the day are going for 2, 5, some 7-mile walks, and they're walking along the beach. And right now, the way the erosion is occurring, particularly in front of Leonardo Arms, the last 2 weeks, the water literally now is abutting a seawall, which is almost like a small cliff. And during even medium and high tide, you cannot get from the north part of the beach to the south part of the beach going past Leonardo Arms. So it's very serious there. And so if you live on the mid or the north part of the beach and you ever want to see the beautiful sort of quieter south part of the beach, you can't get there anymore unless you get in and swim around. I mean, you literally have to swim 200 or 300 yards to get around, which I did yesterday. And it's quite serious. And again, this concept of being able to go north-south on this beach for, but most importantly, our residents, but also for our tourists, I mean, it's a big piece of our beach and the quality of our beach to be able to go such a long way on a beach and have a public beach for that long. So I just think it helps magnify the importance of this project.
I just want a couple things. Well, Chad, the lagoon that's down south. Now, right now, that occasionally breaks through, typically after storms and whatnot, it becomes tidal, right, and gets flushing. With this, with the south renourishment, is that going to be effectively making a dam to prohibit that lagoon water from flushing?
Natural wave action creates that berm, which is effectively a dam. There will be more sand in the system, and the sand will be transported both north and south from that R204 monument.
But it occasionally breaks through, so it would be much more difficult for it to break through once we do the renourishment.
I'm not a coastal engineer.
But I
Answer
think
that.
that's an objective. I don't know, how effective it'll be, well, it's yet to be determined. Of course, it's affected by weather and tidal action, but I think you could say that's an objective of the project.
To make the lagoon not tidal, or less often tidal?
To protect the beach, from tidal actions. And this is what
To prevent
So
the breaches.
Well, I'm just gonna say that, there was a long period of time, for a while, the lagoon was breached fairly often. That's healthy for the lagoon. It gets oxygen into the water. When there's calm periods and we don't have storms, like probably now, I haven't been down there in a while, then the natural wave action builds up a dam that blocks off that tidal flow, and the lagoon becomes more stagnant. The longer it's blocked off, the more stagnant that becomes. Now, and this is also kind of an illustration for the two different models. That's kind of a natural lagoon, right? That's the way it would exist. Through normal means, we're putting sand down. We are closing it off. That it would take a larger storm to break through and flush that lagoon and keep it healthy. Now, the area that we're talking about, where the ponding is, that's not a natural beach, right? The lagoon itself, when it breaks through, there's the same thing that's a healthy model. It keeps the lagoon healthy, but it's also it also is an obstacle to walking the entire length of the beach. And to me, these are two kind of different things. We're going to make this lagoon more stagnant by doing this, and I understand the need, especially in that area, to add sand. I still have a lot of reserves about doing this for the ponding. I understand that having 7 miles of beach you can just walk up and down is great, but the reality is that there's usually a crest at the high tide line that's built up, and water does build up behind that crest. This is not the only place, and if we're going to say we're going to not have that anywhere, then we're really going away from having a natural beach and going towards having a sand.
All right. Any final questions for Chad?
I did want to address well, Councilor Veach was talking, I did want to address the issue of the private beach. So the state defines the beaches rather by public access, and public access, so we have there's a public access across from Albatross. There's also one coming in with the Carousel Project, and there's one coming in at Flamingo. And on top of that, a lot of those condos, you have the Outrigger that's a hotel, and a lot of those condos are vacation condo rentals, which may be registered with DBPR, which also constitutes public access. So the beach is largely, that beach is largely publicly accessible, which is what drives funding. And I understand, all the beaches are quote unquote private, but there is public access there.
Now, is that both a state and a TDC determination?
Yes, sir. The TDC mirrors the state's calculation, is my understanding.
Okay.
I just want to come back to Councilor Veach's point that he was making prior, and that is that, we have a tendency sometimes, and when we're dealing with matters to try to make decisions today that, maybe should be made in a month or 2 or 3 or 4 down the road. Right now, we're just, we're assembling the building blocks for this project and to try to get it all in place. If an area doesn't get sand or gets less sand or whatever, that's something we, once we get the funding and all this stuff in place, we can continue to talk about those issues. But, the important point in terms of what we're trying to do is make sure the community understands. We can go through the funding cycles of the government, because they start on a day and they end on a day. They don't wait for any person or thing to try to get all the pieces put in place. So then we can deal with sort of the individual smaller issues of, do we do this or do we do that? Is it this type of dune, is it that type of dune? And those types of things. So while those are all very good questions, and I'm sure very important to a lot of folks, the phase we're in is to try to get sort of the foundation of the project put in place.
Yeah, I just want to drive home. So the intent has always been to give us the most options. So design a project to allow the town to have as many options as possible to manage the beach.
Sounds good.
Well, you've also phrased this as being the Cadillac option. So, and you know, I've said it before, and is that I think, and I understand a lot of the dynamics, you know, because if you take one property, let's say you took the critical wildlife area, and you only renourish that, then that sand's not going to stay as a bubble. It's going to flatten out. It's going to spread. That happens. So where you put the sand isn't necessarily where it ends up, but just, you know, spending money, and it's our money and others, to put down sand on accreting beaches, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's, you know, we're asking for the Cadillac, and we may end up getting it, and I think we're paying money for things that are just not needed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much.
Yes, sir, you're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I do appreciate the work. Very thorough.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
If I may, before we leave this topic, I know that all of you received a copy of correspondence from an attorney representing Island Winds Condominium, and I just wanted to briefly address the comments, or stated a different way, the request of the attorney in that correspondence where they asked the town to do certain things. And they also made a similar request directly to FDEP. But let's deal with, at least initially, the letter to the mayor and to the council, and where the property owners or the attorney on behalf of the condo association asked for two things: that the town hold a workshop with mailed and published notice of same to all affected littoral owners, with the opportunity for public comment and meaningful discourse between the town and impacted littoral owners. With all due respect to the attorney who wrote this letter, that's what we're doing, and we have been doing for months, frankly. I don't think that it is a secret on this beach that the town has been looking into and starting to begin the process of ultimately seeking state permit and state funding to renourish the beach. And there's a process. We've had a number of meetings, a number of conversations, as was previously mentioned. Staff has met with individual board owners over the time frame. So the fact that the town has not, or the insinuation or inference that the town has not been open and had has been seeking public input on this matter is just patently untrue. And I know that you all have been getting out the word and speaking to individuals as well as associations just by your comments here today. Then the second item, and now certainly that doesn't mean that we will stop. No. The process. I mean, we're just, as everyone has indicated here today, we're in the infancy of the process and of the project. And throughout the process, there will be multiple opportunities for people to comment and to participate in meetings, both sponsored by the town and arguably by FDEP, which goes to the issue. And number two, the association, they're asking the opportunity for the association to retain an independent engineer to assess the town's Estero Island Shore Protection Project and JCP application. That's actually standard practice. I've gone through and assisted other local governments in the JCP process. It sometimes can take years, literally, to go through that state process of obtaining a JCP. And they're, again, on at least on the project, the most recent project that I was involved in, FDEP had multiple meetings with stakeholders at the local area in question. And there's actually a very specific process pursuant to the JCP statute where any affected property owner can provide comments and become part of the public record of ultimately what ends up being the process for the issuance of the JCP. In that regard, again, there's going to be ample opportunity for them to engage their expert. It doesn't mean that, in my opinion, and my advice is that there's no reason for the town to suspend or stop the JCP process, because it is just beginning. And again, there will be ample opportunity for them to engage any experts that they want and provide any comment that they want to the state through that a formal administrative process that exists. And that's the two requests that the attorney made to this body. They sent a similar letter to FDEP, essentially suggesting or asking for similar type of conduct from FDEP. And unless this council says or instructs us differently, I think that the appropriate response, if any, if FDP reaches out to us, is exactly what I just said, which is there's going to be multiple opportunities for stakeholders and property owners to have input into the JCP process, including something that's already occurred, which is apparently the genesis of this letter, which is the designation by the state that sections of our beach are critically eroded. That's already been done. And as Ms. Schutz properly and thoroughly explained, all that gives us the opportunity to avail ourselves of state and other funding sources that otherwise wouldn't be available to us. That's it. That's the net effect of a designation of a critically eroded beach. And as others have said, huge swaths of beaches across the state of Florida have that similar designation.
Okay,
I just wanted to comment on what the attorney just said. If I cut through all that legal talk, you're saying basically that there's plenty of time for public comment, but you're also saying that what they're asking for public comment for has already been done.
It's in the process, yeah. I mean,
So those two kind of contradict. One thing you're saying there's plenty of time for public comment, but then you're saying the things they want to comment on or be notified on has already happened.
Some of it has already, well, I don't know what they know and how they understand the process of how beaches get determined as critically eroded. There's a statutory process and mechanism, and that's already been done. But that has no effect necessarily on the JCP. It is it's a determination that allows us to avail ourselves of state funding that otherwise, without that designation, does not become available.
okay. Just to piggyback on that comment, John, we can always do better as far as getting the word out. But I agree with you that we have been going through this process now for some time. And it's human nature for people not to get into the game, not to jump in until it directly affects them. So that's what's going on here. Some of these property owners are getting in a little bit later in the game now that they know that they're going to be directly affected by this, or may not be. And but they're voicing their concerns, and that's fine. That's fine. But there are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of things being thrown around and bandied about in terms like land grabs by the government and underhanded this and dune plantings that are going to be 30 feet high and all these other things that I've been hearing, and it's just not right. It's just not true. So everybody, this goes back to what I said earlier, everybody needs to calm down, to get involved in the process, become more educated about what's going on here. We're trying to obtain funding for these projects, and this is the process. So, and frankly, when I hear terms like that, you know, it's the town, it's a land grab by the town. Why in God's name would we want to grab these lands? Why would we want to do that? And frankly, when I hear that, it's insulting. It's insulting to me. We're your duly elected officials here to represent you and your interests on this island. Why in God's name would we want to grab your land? We wouldn't. So that's my 2 cents. And the process will keep going forward. And if we can be more transparent, more open about it, more meetings, well, then we will. Then we will. Can we have a workshop or something like that? Why not? You know, why not? And, you know, the more input, the better. And the more people are educated and can see what's going on here, the better. And
I think,
that-
isn't it, and Chad, isn't there, as part of the ECL, isn't the workshops part of that process? And notification of the property owners?
Yeah, depending on how that process plays out, it would be. But to the mayor's point, we could and should have just a project-wide workshop.
all right, I think we beat this up enough today. Does everybody want to continue, move on right now, or you want a little break, or you want to keep going, or anybody need a break? We'll keep going. Okay, the next item is structural inspections. This is our discussion on multi-story / condominium structural inspections as requested by town council. Who wants to start off on this? Roger, you want to start us off?
Well, I think that my recollection is the town council, following what happened in Miami-Dade County, raised a concern about this particular issue, structural integrity of older high-rise condominium buildings or buildings. And I think the issue was put on hold because the state legislature was considering putting some legislation in place. And in fact, their statute, which did not make it through the process, but in its final draft form before it died in Tallahassee, was about 90 pages. So this has been on the council's M&P to sort of monitor that situation and to see what the outcome might be in Tallahassee, and then decide, based on that, if further action was warranted or not. So now that we know, at least for this session, what Tallahassee has not taken it up and is not going to do anything statewide, we just put it on to give the council the opportunity to discuss it further and to give you the opportunity to give further direction to the staff if you'd like us to do anything with respect to the matter.
Okay. That particular failure over there in Miami-Dade was a 40-year-old building. And I think that's where the line was drawn as far as these buildings that they wanted inspected. That also had a particular set of circumstances in it that led to that failure over there. But as a result of that, I can tell you, having been in that business, I was shocked that morning when I saw that building. I mean, it really hit me. And knowing that we have a building here on the beach that is right at that 40-year mark now, it really drove it home to me. So I was looking for some sort of guidance from the state, but of course, in their wisdom, they decided to defer it, which just means that another year will go by where some of these aging buildings may or may not be inspected. But I don't know, you know, with that, in the absence of something from the state, I mean, we're left to it ourselves. I don't know that we're capable of taking this on or not. Maybe we are, but I was hoping kind of that our fire district would weigh in on this and give us some sort of opinions on what type of inspections they might recommend and so forth and so on. I'm sure there are plenty of engineers out here right now in the state of Florida that are busy now with inspections, and I'm sure there are some buildings here on the beach that probably could stand to be inspected. So that's my input on this, and I'll leave it. We'll open it up to you all and see where you want to go with this. Bill, Dan, anybody?
I think Rexanne put this on.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rexanne. I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, when you say take this on, and I understand the legislature had 90-page bill, but I don't think we would need to do that. As I see it, we're not in the business of forcing people to fix their buildings. I just want to make sure that they're doing an inspection during a reasonable period of time. And so I see it as being rather simple legislation that would say, if your building gets to be this old, within the next year, you must complete an inspection for this type of engineering safety, and file a copy and distribute a copy to your members. Now, of course, John, I'm sure will come up with some other things that we need to add to that, but I don't think that this has to be complicated, yet we would be putting people who live in such buildings on notice if they have defects. I'm concerned that, life's good on the beach, everybody's out in the sunshine, no one wants to think about this kind of thing. I'd like to make sure that we make sure that our condo owners at least are put on notice if their building is unsafe.
What do you think about that, John?
The Vice Mayor is correct. It doesn't have to be necessarily too complex unless you all want it to go, more. And the reason why I say that is that there are 2 counties that currently have provisions for what's called the 40-year recertification process. That's Miami-Dade County and Broward County. There has been some discussion in Palm Beach County of them also potentially adopting it. They, I think, were like this community waiting to see what the legislature did, and they may move forward. Bottom line is, we can get the examples of what Miami-Dade County and the municipalities within the county have in the way of 40-year recertification requirements. Same with Broward County. Give you a sampling, provide those to you, and for you all to then, maybe at a future MNP, give us a direction of which one or what portions of which ones you would like us to do, or you can direct me to take on that responsibility myself and provide you with what I believe is maybe the best of all of those, but still provide you those documents as well as backup to show you where we pulled some of the language that ultimately goes into the ordinance, if that's your direction.
I think before I'd be comfortable moving forward with doing some sort of legislative action on this, I'd like to know from the condominium associations what they already have in place for their procedures as far as getting structural engineering drawings or inspections before we legislate something that they may already be doing.
Well, I'll tell you, I attended one of their meetings, and it sounded to me like they were waiting for guidance from us or the state. Since it's not forthcoming from the state, it'll have to be from us. So if we in fact choose to go this route. So I'm all in favor of taking John's advice, the town attorney, and getting a look at what Miami-Dade and Broward are doing over there, and then discussing it again at a future meeting.
I would say a couple things. I'm extremely disappointed that the legislature didn't act upon this. Every prognosticator in the state, both from the left and the right, expected the state to take action on this issue. And part of the challenge that they ran into was they had various reserve requirements in the legislation that created a great deal of debate. As we all know, the catastrophe that happened, there were some inspections. The challenge, of course, is the board, the condo board, didn't take action to correct those, didn't take action on that information to correct the situation, which was obviously very tragic. So I think that's, the legislature really tried to do a deep dive into this thing and for whatever reason got bogged down. Again, very disappointing. I do think it's interesting. I have read that both Broward and Miami-Dade have an ordinance, and I'm curious too if, John, as you do your search, you know, how that ordinance works as a county versus individual municipalities within the county taking that on, and all of a sudden Lee County's got 20 different, ordinances on how to address this. I don't know if Lee County's gonna address this or not. Maybe they're waiting for next year for the legislature, I don't know. But I think it's certainly worthy for you to take a look to see what their ordinance is and how effective it is. And again, does it actually solve the challenge? Of course, if you have an inspection and then the board doesn't take action, then of course, that creates other problems as well, as we have seen with this recent catastrophe. So I'm certainly open to exploring the existing ordinances in those two counties and seeing if it makes sense for an individual municipality to take a look at that. But I certainly would want some more information first.
And yeah, I would concur with people. I think that I look at this as like 3 steps, right? As one is some kind of mandating some kind of inspection. The second would be mandating some kind of action based on that inspection. And the third is reserve funding just in case something happens. So that last one is probably where the state got bogged down. But I agree with maybe a lighter touch, just letting the board know, you know, making sure they get inspections and they're aware of problems. 'Cause I know that on the East Coast, there's recently been a condo that was forced evacuation because of conditions, and there's been a couple of those. So they are finding things in their renewed inspection push. But like also Councilman Adderholt said, a light touch wouldn't have helped the Surfside because they did inspect. And then their response was, well, let's do another inspection and see if we get more favorable results. So, but I think coming up with some model ordinances or some ordinances of other municipalities would help us move forward with this.
John, how does that work over there with the two counties? I mean, they're legislating what all the municipalities have to do? Because here in Lee County, the only high-rises on the beach are all within municipal borders.
And that is correct. And Miami-Dade County in particular is a species unto its own. It's actually embodied in the Florida Constitution. Miami-Dade County is treated differently than every other county in the state of Florida. And what I mean by that is that Miami-Dade County has what I would call a super home rule power authority. So they have the authority in Miami-Dade County to adopt an ordinance and say to all the municipalities, thou shall do it as well. If you don't adopt something that is at least equal to us or better, you must follow what we have done as a bare minimum. And so that is how everyone in Miami-Dade County, and all the municipalities in Miami-Dade County have the 40-year recertification requirement. Some just basically rely upon the Miami-Dade County regulations, and others don't. For example, because I have personal experience with this, the city of Miami has adopted its own set of regulations for 40-year recertification. But as I said before, they must meet the minimum requirements of Miami-Dade County. Broward County is is actually a little similar in that it's a charter county, and years ago there was a fight between the municipalities and the counties as to what the limits of that authority was, and the appellate court and then the Florida Supreme Court ruled that with regard to land development regulations, which arguably this may or may not be, depending upon your approach, is that Broward County had the right to impose minimum requirements on the municipalities. So bottom line is that all of them pretty much follow either the Miami-Dade County model or the Broward County model at the local government level. And again, I can provide you with a sampling of that.
I'd be interested in seeing if there are any along the Gulf Coast communities up and down, maybe up by Tampa, see what they have in place, something that is a little closer to what we experience every day versus what they experience as far as conditions.
I don't think anyone has it.
Really?
Outside of, the first instance that I've heard of since the Surfside, and as a result of the Surfside incident, was that the city of Boca Raton in Palm Beach County said, we're gonna adopt a 40-year recertification. We can look, but I'm not aware of, it appears to be, based upon my experiences and interaction, to be a uniquely Southeast Florida issue or requirement.
Well, we might take a look at Boca's then, too, what they have.
Yeah, I will. I will. I'll look everywhere. I'll look across the state, but my guess is that the majority of sampling that I'm going to find is going to be either in Broward or in Miami-Dade County, and then, as you point out, the city of Boca.
So, Mayor, you've been in this for a little while. How many condos do we have that are 40 years or older?
Well, we have one at Island's End, another one that's getting pretty close, and I don't know, there's probably, I don't know, off the top of my head, there might be a dozen or more, maybe more, up and down the beach, that would fall into that. And they're all coming of that age pretty soon here, so,
Because a lot of those are built around the 80s, right?
yes.
And I would say, it just as someone who's been on a condo board here and is on the beach, our condo board, well, I'm not on the board now, but they're currently in conversations with an engineering firm to do a study just to be proactive. So there's a lot of condo boards who are on top of this and aggressively trying to make changes. But, if there's a way we can look at a model ordinance that works, I'm certainly open to it.
Yeah, and we had the one get-together with the Condo Association of Fort Myers Beach, where we could do that again. We could all get together again. There's another perfect example of having a workshop. We can all get the condo reps together, get some engineers in there, and maybe look at some proposed legislation and put everybody in the same room and see what comes out of there.
'Cause I'd hate to see a good proactive board go through and do an inspection that then doesn't qualify for whatever we come up with and have to do another inspection.
That was exactly my counsel to our board right now, is that we better wait to see what happens, because you may have a wonderful engineering study, but it may not meet the criteria of what's going to come forth. So, but there are a lot of people who want to be proactive on it and address the issue head on. But you make a good point. It is a challenge with.
Well, I wouldn't want to discourage them from moving forward if they have it in process.
No, that's right.
If they've got something going, I wouldn't discourage them.
No.
We can work something out with those people.
I agree.
John, I'd also be interested to see in your research, if what you're finding out is it restricted to just condo associations, or does it include hotels and businesses that could be reaching that same 40-year threshold?
Any building.
Any building?
Yeah, I think that don't quote me on it, but I believe it's any structure, irrespective of, over a certain height. I think it's 3 floors.
Okay, that was a good discussion. We'll move on. The next item is code enforcement philosophies. I'll have to tell you that in school, I took very few philosophy courses, so but we're going to talk about code enforcement. Who wants to start this off?
Well, I was the one who put this on, so.
Okay, Bill.
Start it off.
Go right ahead.
Now, there's a couple things that really wanted me to bring this to, because my understanding is that currently, and this was a decision that was made, I think, prudently, is that we have some aspects of code enforcement where it has to do with life and safety, something like building codes, which were proactive. So if someone's building something, they didn't do a permit, we don't wait for a complaint. Most of the other things are complaint-driven, particularly things like, short-term rentals, vendors, et cetera, et cetera. There was an incident here not long after I was on town council where there was a house that was being built three doors down from mine on Astoria Boulevard. And near the end, when they had the landscaping done and they didn't have a lot of place to put stuff, they would have vehicles that were parked on the sidewalk, sometimes sidewalk and the bicycle path. Then it got to the point where they actually took their porta potty and had it sitting on the sidewalk. And this went on for a couple of weeks during season when tourists or people on bicycles had to go into the lane of traffic. And I've even seen one recently down there in the south part where there were trucks parked in the turn lane, and there were trucks parked on the bicycle lane, and there was like a little canyon, and the bicycles had to not only go into that traffic lane, but there's no other place for the cars to go, which creates a dangerous circumstance. This went on and nothing was done. And so I called a complaint, and within 15 minutes, Nello went down, talked to him, and they cleared out the path. Now, I would guess that probably hundreds of staff had driven by when that was going on, but nothing really happened. To me, that was a little too lean as far as that goes. Now, so the high end is, and also since this philosophy came to be, the state legislator has said now there's no such thing as an anonymous complaint. And if you want to complain, that the violator will get your information and the who complained, which kind of gets you into the neighbor versus neighbor dynamic, which I think is prudent to avoid. And I also know that there was like with we've been pouring through this chapter 27 for the jet skis. My understanding, there's a lot of violations of those jet skis, but the staff was kind of told by council to hold off because there was so many violations. So specifically, I guess I want to talk about, what do we mean when we do have something that's a life and safety issue? How do we think it's suitable for our staff to enforce that? Somewhere between doing nothing unless there's a complaint to driving around writing up citations for grass too long, right? There's a whole area in there that I think we should explore. And the other thing is there's areas where we know there are violations going on. What direction do we give to staff to try to bring things into control? Because if we're writing code that we don't want the staff to enforce, then why are we really bothering writing that code? So this is kind of why I brought this. I have a lot more specifics, but I'd like to kind of hear what the town council thinks of our current enforcement strategy, if you will.
Hearing none, we'll move on. But I'll tell you, I'm with you on that. That's a recent phenomenon now with the new and improved road. This is another unintended consequence, is that the landscapers and their trailers are now using that lane to work out of. They'll park, they'll park their pickup truck with their trailer attached, put their gate down, get their equipment out, go service the lawns and the yards and what have you, and then when they're done, they load back up and leave. So they're using the center turn lane as their parking instead of parking on the property itself where they're working. So that's a problem, and it's a problem because I've been down through just what you explained, Bill, where they're out in the road and then people are coming down this way and it's backing up traffic and they want to go around and it's just it's a mess. It's a mess, which should be avoidable. I agree with some of what you're saying, is that I think, and I'll wait to hear from the staff, but this is just me thinking out loud, that when there are egregious violations that are right there in front of you and visible right in your face, that our enforcers who are driving up and down, our staff that are driving up and down the boulevards and the streets, should be able to, either have them move on or cite them or whatever, and have that authority to do that. And I'll probably be told that they already do have that authority, but it's whether or not they're going to enforce it. So that's in that particular case. Now, going beyond that, I'll wait to hear from everybody else, but I do agree that there are certain cases where the staff should have a little more willingness to enforce the codes. And again, we're not cops, and I don't know how this affects us. Not owning a sterile boulevard, I don't know how that comes into the equation or not. But certainly we can improve on this.
I guess the thing, I would jump in and say that I agree that it's a dangerous situation where they're parking in the right-of-way and they're parking in our turn lane. right-of-way, I can see that our code enforcement might have something to say about that. But when they're parking in that middle lane, that's up to the Lee County Sheriff to be enforcing. We shouldn't be putting that on our guys and girls and gals.
Well, then maybe we ought to discuss this.
So I would say, and that, I consider it quite serious. It has gotten to the point, at one time, I counted 5 vehicles bumper to bumper in the turn lane. And it's gotten, and they're just getting, now that they're getting away with it, they're doing it more and more.
Exactly, they're emboldened.
But I would say we need to refer that particular violation to the sheriff's office.
You know,
And it's not just, I'm sorry, Dan, it's not just the landscapers. I picked on the landscapers. A lot of them are, but it's also the construction guys, that are building the homes and so forth, and the subcontractors that are parking out there. And I've seen them mixing concrete out there, I mean, it's crazy. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I think we're talking about two different things here. As you said, the roadway is Lee County Sheriff's jurisdiction as far, it shouldn't be on our guys to have to tell them that they can't park there. Porta potties on the sidewalk, I think a lot of this, Bill, to answer some of your question, to me, comes down to common sense. Two of the biggest things that we've talked about are safety and environmental things. If either of those two things fall into something that our staff sees, I think it should be, and it's within our jurisdiction again, I think it's something that should be addressed immediately. Whether it's chemicals leaking into the street, whether it's porta potties on the sidewalk, if it's creating a public safety issue, or if it's creating an environmental issue, that's something that we should deal with right away. Now, if someone leaves their garbage cans out on the end of their street too long, I think that's part of the reason why they put in the legislation at the state level that you have to give your name, because I could tell you there's people that call things in, and as the staff will probably tell you, every single day, sometimes 3 times a week about the same issue, but they don't have to leave their name and there's no consequences. That's taking up a lot of town resources on things that aren't necessarily as important as a porta potty in the middle of a sidewalk. So for me, it comes down to common sense. I know we've talked a lot about warning first. There are some people that may not know what every code is. They may not know that they can't ride their electric bike on the beach, and they need to be warned that they can't do that. So I can't say it enough. I think it comes down to common sense. I think you give someone a warning on something that is not a life safety issue or an environmental issue. And if they continue to do it, then you escalate. Then you escalate your code enforcement. But that's kind of where I'm standing on it.
And I don't want to get too bogged down about, the Estero right away. I think don't we have some kind of code saying that construction, they have to be able to hold all the vehicles within the lot? I think it was something like that.
So, on our streets, okay, if someone's gonna do a construction project and they can't fit all the construction vehicles on the property from which they're constructing, they can come to the town and get a permit to temporarily park, and we go out there and we work with them to develop an area that's safe for them to park their vehicles, that is relatively close to the construction site, and yet not inhibit traffic or block other people's driveways, et cetera. So we do that on our streets. And it was mentioned earlier, Estero is not our street, so we don't do that on Estero.
Now, and I wouldn't know when you talk about warnings, and I know that I do think the staff is very good about communicating, not just rushing and writing citations now. But the case on Estero by my place, I think Nello just went down and talked to him. I mean, I don't think there was any citation issued. It was just saying, you can't do this. That changed. I don't know if anybody's done that with some of the other ones. And honestly, downtown, I see that, they put these trucks in the turn lane to load and unload because they have nowhere else to go. And that's probably the best place for them. So I wouldn't, but, if it's completely blocked off and it gives me a safety issue, it really gives me some problem. But let's go also, because of what Councilman Allers here said, that the difference between life and safety and then other things. And you're right, there's a difference between, if someone's putting their trash out a day early, right, is that a big deal? Well, if you have a rental company that they routinely, rotate through on Saturdays, so they put the trash out on Saturday every time and leave it there until Wednesday or Thursday, then is that an issue? Because if you let them do it once, where's the line? And that also comes down to another thing where I think that where enforcement is a particularly tricky thing is with the short-term rental ordinances, because it's from what I'm told, it's very tricky to get enough evidence on somebody to bring them in front of the magistrate to make it stick. because it's pretty open. They don't have a lot of tools. It's kind of a cat and mouse game. When I was researching the short-term rental fees that were being charged by different municipalities, I came onto some bulletin boards that were just about how to play specific municipality short-term rental rules. I learned, Treasure Island doesn't apparently allow short-term rentals, but there's a whole bulletin board about how to get away with it. So our councilmen are, our staff are pretty busy, trying to do this, but then there's a whole community out there that is finding ways to circumvent whatever the rules, whatever the enforcement mechanism that the short-term rental enforcers have. And that's an area I think where, there's been a couple different suggestions that I've heard. One is to, right now, with my understanding for short-term rentals, I know this is getting kind of nuts and bolts instead of just talking about philosophy, is that everyone who's legal has a registration number, right? And if you put a sign up, the sign's supposed to have that registration number, and I believe in the ads, it's supposed to have that registration number. One thing we could do is have every short-term rental has to have a sign, and that sign would have its number and indicate on that whether they are a weekly or a monthly rental, just so it's in the air. I've heard that when the short-term rental ordinance was first proposed, they proposed having a calendar on the town would have, that the short-term rental operators have to put on that calendar when the place is rented, so it can be tracked as far as compliance. And then when the staff goes to look and see if the rental calendar and the renters match, they have something to go by. The other thing too is to, maybe we allocate some of the money from the increased short-term rental funds for enforcement, but without necessarily having town council air out exactly what enforcement is doing so that the mouse know what the cat's doing. So that's one area. And like I said, I think like the jet ski vendors, I think there's a lot of potential violations that are going on there that we're not really enforcing. And I think that if we're gonna have ordinances, I think we should take at least a reasonable effort to enforce them prudently.
Councilor Veach, I agree with some of the things that you said. And if you want to have discussions about specific topics, whether it be Chapter 27 that you're talking about or the short-term rental things, I think we can have those. But I think my understanding is we're here to talk about the philosophy of the enforcement, not necessarily specific enforcement of specific ordinances. When this came up, some people have reached out and asked, well, their discussion falling in line with philosophies is complaint-driven versus not complaint-driven. And I guess for me, that's why I keep saying common sense. Common sense tells me if it's a life and safety issue or if it's an immediate environmental issue, I don't know that necessarily has to be a complaint for town staff if they see it to be able to act on it. Things like garbage cans and more broad things, that should be a complaint-driven issue. That's something that if someone calls in that has a specific problem with it, then we send the resources from the town out to address it. But again, go back to if it's the philosophy is what we're trying to talk about here. What is the philosophy I think the staff needs to understand from us is the direction of how they're going to enforce the code. Am I making sense?
Well, yeah, I think what I hear you saying is the way we're doing it now, you're fine with. That if it's an economic violation, short-term rental violation, these kind of things that keep it complaint-driven. If it is, even though the state's now said that can't be anonymous, it's got to be you have to let the violator knows who's complaining. But then if it's a health and safety issue, which they're doing now, building codes, then they're proactive.
Not exactly. I'm not saying leaving it the way that it is now. What I'm saying is just to use the analogy or the example that you gave at the beginning about the porta potty that was on the sidewalk. That's a health and safety issue. And if our staff is passing that and not doing anything about it, that's something that I would be willing to say they should have the right to be able to stop if they see it right away and do it. It shouldn't have to take someone like yourself or myself or any other resident on the island or visitor to call in to say, hey, this is a violation. This is something that could potentially cause some safety issues. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the status quo, the way that things may or may not be getting done now is what I'm in favor of. What I'm saying is to use common sense. If you're driving and you're working for the staff and you're on code enforcement and you see something that doesn't look like it's a very safe thing, I'd be perfectly fine with them stopping saying, you can't do this, please correct it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, let's just take that, because I'm using examples, because sometimes with the, to come up with the strategy, you have to look at specific examples, see what fits into a strategy. So then what would you say if there was an annual rental house that had 50 people in it over a weekend? Now, a lot of the neighbors may not know to complain. They may also be short-term renters who are bothered, but they don't know what the regulations are. So is that something that town staff, if they see that, they should take action?
Well, that's a pretty open-ended question, because if I'm renting a house that I'm only supposed to have 4 people at, but it has a pool and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I have other friends that are renting other houses and we're over there, and now there's 6 cars there instead of 2 cars, is that something that the staff would have any way of knowing that those people are staying there or not staying there, without someone calling and saying, hey, at 12 o'clock at night, these guys are having a pool party? So I think it's a very tough thing to disseminate, to figure out from a town's perspective, but that's not a, if they've got 12 cars in the parking lot that are not in the right of way, and they're just having a pool party with their friends who are renting other houses, staff should have nothing to do with that. That should be, if it's causing an issue, someone can call in and say, hey, they got 12 people swimming in the pool. Now, if it's happening at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's a whole different issue. If, staff's probably not out there at that time, but someone's gonna call if it's too noisy. They're gonna call the police, and the police are gonna go handle it. So it's very difficult to say, but a porta potty on a sidewalk is a very specific example that causes issues, just as you said, of bikes having to go out of their way and into traffic to not get hit or to run into something. That's two different examples.
Yeah, and certainly there are more of the, what you call economic crimes as opposed to health and safety crimes, you know what I mean? Or violations, I should say, more than crimes. But, I've talked to so many people about issues, and they'll tell you, that something's really bothering them. There's a house, it used to be an annual rental, now it's, renting by the day, but they don't complain.
But why, how is that a town problem then? I mean,
Because that's violating the town
well,
ordinance.
the state regulated that you have to give the name, the town didn't. So if you're choosing not to complain because you don't want to give your name, that's a you problem, that's not a town problem.
But it changes the dynamic.
How does it,
Because
you either
now-
choose to complain or you don't.
Well, no, you could have complained. If someone is shy about complaining, now they have to give their name, they're less likely to complain.
Well,
It doesn't mean the problem is less.
I don't disagree with that, but my point is the town didn't make that rule, the state did.
No, but what Bill is saying is because the state changed the rule, maybe the town needs to modify our philosophy to help out those folks. Because the situation did change even though we didn't change it.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you for saying that, but the philosophy, again, I don't know how much more we need to go into it. Maybe you can opine on what you think, Madam Vice Mayor, but every situation is going to be a little bit different, but you've got to use common sense in a situation that you're in on anything that you do, and I don't think it should be any different for our town staff. If they get a complaint, they're going to go act on it. I'm assuming that they send someone out as soon as they get the complaint, but if something bothers me enough, I'm going to complain, or I'm going to deal with it. But that's on me. I shouldn't expect the town to make decisions for me because I'm afraid to say or do something.
Well, one thing I would say to you, Mr. Allers, is due to your sex and size, if you make a complaint, you're less likely to endure backlash or retaliation, which I have. So we need to be protecting our more vulnerable members of our town. And because the state made some people more afraid, I think that maybe, and this is shades of gray, it's very difficult to be black and white here, but maybe we need to be saying to our code enforcement people, if you see something, do something about it, especially if it's a life and safety issue. I think because people are more afraid to complain than they used to be.
Well, I would-
So,
yeah.
For example, and I know we were trying not to use specifics, but the porta potty on the sidewalk, the code enforcement guy driving by, that doesn't leap to his mind as a life and safety issue, maybe, because in the past we were leaning more toward the complaint-driven. But I guess what I would say, what I would like to say to the code enforcement folks is maybe think a little more about what really is a safety issue. It doesn't have to be as drastic as maybe we were seeing in the past, but some things are still a safety issue. And maybe, for example, I said it was the sheriff's problem when people are parking in the center and that's a safety issue. But maybe code enforcement could call the sheriff about it. I don't think they should be the ones doing it, but because of the fact that people are less likely to call things in, maybe our code enforcement people could call the sheriff when they see those kinds of things. So I guess what I would be saying to them is let's shade this a little bit more toward a little bit more proactiveness by code enforcement. I'm not saying to get completely away from common sense, but maybe because townspeople are less likely to complain, that code enforcement could kind of step up a little bit about that.
You know, I've had some conversations in the past, and I want to speak for the Lee County Sheriff's Office, but with the Lee County Sheriff's Office about the potential of working with some of the beach patrol or town staff to be able to have some sort of direct communication with the Lee County Sheriff's Office for situations like this. That's something that may be outside our comfortability or our purview of being able to enforce, but instead of going through the normal thing that you or I would maybe have to go through to get someone to come out there, that there's a potential for them to be able to have a direct communication with some of our beach patrol or town staff to get out there quicker. I don't know if that's something that we can reach out and talk to them a little bit more in depth about. Obviously, it would require a little bit of training. But I speaking with a couple members of the sheriff's office, there's ways that they can train them to use certain, radios that work on different frequencies that have direct communication, that if they see something, they can handle it much quicker than calling in a complaint. Because if you, going back to what you said, Madam Vice Mayor, if you feel threatened by whether it's a neighbor or someone because you're going to complain about something they do or continue to do, that is definitely a county sheriff issue. That's something you should be calling them and telling them I do not feel safe about, because they're the ones that can handle it. Our town staff can't handle that.
Agreed.
And I thought something like that already existed, at least years ago, that they had a fairly good communication. I think I was on the beach once and something happened, and I thought they had like some kind of radio or.
So, no, so when we, for example, when the example that was given, when Nello goes to the vehicle that's illegally parked on a stereo and says, and educates them, you can't leave your vehicle here or whatever, what he's really saying is to them, I'm gonna have the sheriff here in 2 minutes, and you're gonna get, a $50 or whatever the appropriate ticket is if you're still here. So that communication is happening. Whether that's when we have to trespass somebody from one of our town properties or whatever, we have a very good relationship where we just reach out to the captain or lieutenant directly who's on duty that day, and they send somebody out immediately. So we don't necessarily run it through dispatch all the time, if that's the point that I think was being alluded to. So just to be clear, we currently place our staff emphasis on the following: public safety, health and safety, which I wouldn't wrap environmental into that, and things that are occurring sort of on the spot and can't be undone. Because by virtue of the fact they're happening right then and there. Once they're done, and they can't be undone. What would we call that?
Irreversible violation.
Irreversible, irrevocable type of a violation. So those are the things we currently are proactive about. Other things, it's interesting for me to hear the conversation because at the end of the day, it's not what I decide or Daphne decides or even the magistrate or John or the magistrate decides. Everyone who gets a violation has a recourse to coming to you. And you're going to decide whether or not that person pays that fine and how much it's going to be. So I guess my point is that we don't want to spend a lot of energy getting it all the way through the process, all the way to the point where the person is coming here and you're saying, that's such a terrible thing. They left their garbage cans out 2 days early. So this conversation helps us understand your perspective so that we know where to focus our energies, because we don't want to be spinning our wheels.
I'm gonna take a stab at this, Councilor Veach, because I think I may be a bit misunderstood in terms of my philosophy on this, because I think you've made reference to it in the past, and I just want to be clear. When I was running a couple years ago and going door to door and knocked on doors from north to south, as many as we could. I got a sense from the public at large, again, perception-wise, that enforcement was being very punitive at times. And some of this was anecdotal, some of this was folklore, you know how the stories go, and there was a sense that it wasn't collaborative. And I heard that, and one of the things that people kept stressing to me is that we didn't even know about this regulation or ordinance or whatever. And so I tried and have tried to focus on the education piece, and we had a great, the council indulged me a little bit, and we had a great colloquy with the person from code enforcement who's in charge of permits and who, in terms of what permits you require. And I think I went through 50 different items asking, do you need a permit? And both Roger and John were right to say, hey, this permit, these regs are state regs. These aren't even local ordinances. But I think even the permit guy was challenged on a couple of them. And certainly, I think we all learned that certain permits were required for things we didn't know were required. And so my point is that we have and when I first got here, the amount of fines the town was collecting was increasing dramatically over the 3 years prior to the election. And I was concerned about that trend because I know at times we have to fine. I know there's bad actors out there. But I don't think a fine is always a sign of success, and I certainly don't think it should be a source of revenue the town counts on. Certainly it is revenue for the town and depends upon it. It shouldn't depend upon that revenue. I think the more we educate the public, and after that, I'm still hoping we could do a press release on what, by the way, the town's website's much better on what you need a permit for, and that's been a great improvement. I'm hoping we can do a press release on that and do some earned media and let people know what you need a permit for. And you could say, oh, always call the town before you do anything. That's kind of a generic. I think we need to be very specific and try to give as much guidance we can, as much education as we can. I also think, back to the common sense piece, I hear what both you and the vice mayor are saying, Councilor Veach, and I'm sympathetic. And I think if we have an ordinance on the books, it ought to be enforced. I mean, I have no problems with that, but I do think common sense should come into play. I think, warnings ought to be given, particularly when there's an innocent violation and somebody's not knowledgeable of the ordinance. I know ignorance of the law is no excuse, but at the same time, this is a small town. This is a friendly community. We work collaboratively together where we could give a warning where it's not public safety or public health or environment, where we can do that and work with our public, educate the public. I think that's great, and I think our code enforcement does that on most occasions. And so I think it's an approach, really. I think we have to do a better job educating people as to what our ordinances are. And as I tell my friends who are complaining about an ordinance or this and that, I said, and that it was enforced, I say, well, if it's a bad ordinance, come to the council and make your case. Maybe we need to revoke an ordinance, maybe we need to tweak an ordinance, but we can't just say, oh, it's on the books, just ignore it. I mean, it is an ordinance, so I get that. So to me, it's a common sense approach. It's a kinder and gentler approach. Doesn't mean they're not bad actors who could care less how kind and how educational we are and that they're going to be bad actors. I do think that's a very small percentage of the people who violate. I think many of the folks are trying to comply. They're busy people. They don't watch the council meetings. They don't have time. They have lives, and they're not immersed in all of the ordinances. And quite honestly, the contractors who I knew who watched that little colloquy on what you need a permit for, many of them didn't know they needed a permit for some of this stuff. So we have an obligation to educate people as to what our rules are, why permits are required, why we have rules for this and why we have rules for that, what the background is. We got to be proactive. I'd love to say, I've said this from the very beginning. I think the town manager, the head of the enforcement ought to each month come and say, hey, these are the 3 areas that we've seen the most fines coming to the town on. And here's what people can do to prevent them from ever being fined. You can't do this, you can't build a fence here, you can't do this. And we need to update people constantly as to why we should be cheering code enforcement for less fines coming in, because we've done a better job educating people so we never have to fine anybody in the first place. To me, again, there are certain exceptions, health and safety, and quite honestly, the percentage of bad actors that are out there. But for me, the fining is not necessarily a demonstration of success. It's a last resort. And so, to me, it's philosophical. I do agree that all the ordinances ought to be enforced, but we ought to do it with a common sense way, give people warnings, educate people, try to work collaboratively with the town. I know that's sort of vague, but this is a philosophical discussion. but I'm not necessarily in disagreement with you in the fact that these ordinances need to be enforced, and they don't necessarily have to have a complaint to enforce them. I think the town staff ought to be able to do it, but they ought to approach it in a kind, common sense way, again, unless these other factors are at play.
And I would actually, I agree with you. I mean, I think that one thing we've talked about and seems to be evidence is that the staff, and what you're talking about, like permitting and zoning is something that would not be necessarily complaint driven, right? That's something that's considered health and safety. And I think they do work with people. And I do know from my personal experience and talking to people that most people who come here from somewhere else are just amazed at how many rules there are. And, you know, part of that's being in a flood area like we are. You know, a lot of you said is even Florida doesn't have anything to do with the town. But, you know, someone up in Ohio, they could, you know, go in their backyard and build a shed and not eat anything. You know, here is a whole different situation. But there are circumstances certainly where you're being harmed by somebody doing something even though you're not aware of it, right? If someone comes from Ohio and they buy a house on a stilt home, and there's a garage under it, and they finish off the garage to rent it out, they may think, well, back in Ohio, that's what I can do. And here we can't. But that can affect our flood ratings. So people doing that without kind of any enforcement, even though you may live blocks away, it could affect our flood ratings, and you could pay more for flood insurance. And I think too, you know, with what happens with the short-term rental violations and what the effect that has on our housing and our traffic, those are things that affect you, even though you know, you may not be near there, or you may just not want to complain. So I think what I'm getting from this, listening to council, I think that, you know, certainly the way we're doing things with the building codes, I think everybody seems to be pretty happy with that. But I think that maybe saying that a slightly more proactive approach in at least warning people who are doing something that's not a health and safety issue, having a conversation, education, and then if the person does not change, then they move on to the next step. And that is something that our staff has shown that they're apt at doing. It's like the whole example again, so that we keep getting back to the porta potty. All it took was a conversation. The guys probably had no idea, or it was creep, but all they needed was a conversation. It cleared it up, no fines, and won on. I think that's an example of it should have been. I just don't think it should have been gone on for a couple of weeks and had me complain to get the thing rolling. I think staff should be empowered when they see that to, you know, if it's Beach Patrol, to talk to them. If it's somebody else, you know, have Beach Patrol go and talk to them to let them know that you can't do this, and you know, that's a more cooperative approach. I also think when we were going through, and I don't want to segue too much into the next, if we're going to talk about the what John drew up with the different liens, something that, you know, we were saying that, you know, do this process of the foreclosure or the injunction if there's enough money in the fines to make it economically justifiable. Again, I don't think this should be a profit center going after these liens, but maybe we could also give direction saying that if there is a pervasive problem, if there is a habitual offender who maybe doesn't have a huge number of fines, that we put them on a list, we give them priority to also go to the next level of enforcement on that.
I think I can speak for the staff and say that the fines are not a profit center. The fines are supposed to be a deterrent to these people that are violating the ordinances that we and the people of the town have put on the books. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that code enforcement is a push with the fines, if not a loser. So that would be my guess. But anyhow, be that as it may, if you wanted to comment, Roger.
Well, yeah, so, you know, when I think about the sort of the code enforcement fines, I think about the analogy of sending a child to private school. So, you know, the first time your child goes to private school misbehaves, they get a detention. The second time they misbehave, they'll give the child a detention on a Saturday or a Sunday, depending, and make the parents sit in the detention with them. And then the third time the child misbehaves at school, they say, thank you very much for the tuition, find your kid another school. So it's not really the money, it's really correcting the behavior. So we're not about the fines, we're about using the structure of the town's government to elicit the proper behavior. We hope it never comes to fines. We hope it just comes to, you ask a question, we educate you, you do it correctly, and things are resolved. Less work for us, better results for them. But unfortunately, we have some people who don't understand that concept. I think John provided a memo with a couple of those folks to you all. And not only are they, violating the code, they're making money, making an economic advantage by violating the code. So they're incentivized to violate the code and continue to violate. It wasn't a matter of, oh, I didn't realize I was doing something wrong and I'll stop tomorrow. It's like, well, I'm going to continue to do this because I don't care. So we, just like a police officer, try to use the appropriate discretion the circumstances warrant to elicit the proper behavior for the circumstances. That's all we're trying to do. And I think I've told some of you privately, but I'll tell you all publicly, believe me, any day that the words code enforcement or fines or citations or notices of violation don't come up in my day's course of work is a good day for me.
And what you're also fond of saying, nobody gets up in the morning and says, oh, I can't get to work, I can't wait to get to work because I'm doing code enforcement today.
Yeah, and including our code enforcement officers.
Right, exactly.
So the point is that all we're trying to do is get people to understand the codes and follow the codes, because I believe the codes that were put in place by this council and prior councils were well-intentioned. They were to protect the quality of life, protect the health and safety of the public. They weren't just willy-nilly, like, well, what do we want to put on the agenda today? We don't have anything, let's throw this on there because we have nothing better to talk about. I think all these codes were put in place because they have a purpose. They have a need. Hopefully, we're only affecting less than 1% of the population with them, but occasionally we do have to deal with some people who, in some cases, there's education, but in a lot of cases, unfortunately, it's just that the prevailing attitude is, I'm going to do what I want, and if I get caught, I get caught, and I'll deal with it later.
And in defense of the codes, just my last comment, and, since the incorporation, all of the codes and ordinances that have gone into effect that were brought forward and initiated by the town councils over the years have added to the quality of life here on the beach. I mean, have improved the quality of life, have affected today's real estate market, So while the short-sighted people might look at it and say, oh my God, they're coming after us for this and that and everything else, overall, I think if you really interviewed people and got into their heart of hearts, they would admit that they have improved the quality of life here on Fort Myers Beach. And I know they have, because I've seen it over the 26, 7 years now. So that's it for me.
I just want to, I'm going to go over one kind of, the example you gave about like the bad kid in school and detention, all that kind of stuff. So with our current thing, the first thing usually is a warning, right? Or maybe just a conversation with somebody, right?
Right, so let me give you an example. So if we have someone who has a restaurant who grease trap overflows and they wash the grease into our drain, there's no warning for that, because that's irrevocable type of behavior. The damage is done, the grease has gotten to our drainage system, there's nothing, we give them a warning, but we're also giving them a citation and cost to repair what the problem that they created. So that's different than someone who might leave their garbage can out, or, the grass was overgrown, but they didn't know that their gardener had COVID, so he was out for a month and didn't cut the grass. So that's a discretion.
But now, okay, so typically though, let's just take a typical example. You go from a warning, right, to a citation, and then the next step is a magistrate?
Well,
I'll field this one. I'll
Okay.
field this. So the state law under which we operate requires a notice of violation and a notice of hearing. Most municipalities, including Fort Myers Beach, go one step further. So before the notice of violation is issued, which is essentially the charging document, the ticket, however you want to paraphrase it, a warning. You reach out to the violator. Staff meets with them and says, hey, we've received a complaint. We've investigated. We've determined there's a violation. We're giving you a warning. We're giving you a courtesy warning that this is not allowed by the code. If it happens again, we come back out, then you're most likely going to get a notice of violation. And so that's the process. And I know I've said this before, but I want to reiterate that generally speaking, not just in Fort Myers Beach, but in almost all jurisdictions where I've worked over the many years, both as a government attorney and as a special magistrate, by the time the case gets to the special magistrate for a hearing, in some instances, 4, 5, 7 months have gone by where staff has tried to work with the violator to remedy the violation. And so...
The notice of a hearing is for the magistrate hearing.
Exactly. So the notice of violation is the official document that says, we have investigated a complaint, we are finding you to be in violation, you have X number of days to comply the violation. If you comply the violation, essentially nothing happens. That's it. The case gets closed out, an affidavit of compliance is recorded. If you don't, then a hearing will be set for the case to be presented to the special magistrate. That time runs, then that notice of hearing is issued. That alone accounts for 60 days, 2 months, generally.
And then if they go to the magistrate and lose, they have a right to appeal.
Yeah, but hang on a second, before that happens, typically what the magistrate will say, at least our magistrate, will say is, it sounds like you're in violation. If you don't correct this problem, not from today, if you don't correct this problem in 10 days from today, I'm telling you, I think you're in violation. If you don't correct this problem in X number of days, I'm authorizing the town to fine you X amount per day thereafter. So she's giving them another window to get into compliance. And only if they exceed that window does
The fine begin to accrue.
financial fine begin to accrue.
So it doesn't accrue until a magistrate.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then we go back to the magistrate to impose the lien. So let's just say that the fine then is accrued, the situation does get resolved, and now it's a certain dollar amount. We go back to the magistrate to impose the lien. The magistrate could say no fine, the magistrate could adjust the fine, or the magistrate could say, yes, you didn't do what I ordered you to do, and therefore your fine is this, and it's okay to lien the property for that amount of money.
And I would add that the vast majority of cases that we take back to the special magistrate for the imposition of a lien are cases where the property owner has taken no steps to correct the violation. Because if they've corrected the violation, maybe past the time frame, then staff can enter into discussions and resolve what the amount of the outstanding fine is, and gets resolved administratively. So again, the vast majority of the cases that go back to the special magistrate for the imposition of a lien are because the property owner has not brought the property into compliance within the time frame initially set in the notice of violation, the notice of hearing, and the special magistrate's order. Which generally, again, in of itself, that spans generally 3 to 4 months.
So how many liens does the town currently have because of some code violation?
Well, the ones that are in the memo are the ones that are the largest amount and also involve situations where, as mentioned before, there's been no compliance.
But I was just wondering how many.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Daphne Saunders, Community Services Administration. We have approximately 25.
So 25 people have gone through this entire process and got to this lien.
Right, but their lien may be for $1,000 because they corrected the violation after the deadline, and it's just sitting there waiting for them to pay or the property to transfer,
Or the coming before you.
or coming before you and requesting mitigation.
And so then we get in a situation like with those houses by Junkanoo, where,
No.
That's,
No,
that's
that's
a
just
totally
completely
unique set of,
different, yeah.
unique set of
Yeah,
circumstances.
that's an outlier for sure.
There's a court order settlement there that they're not in compliance with in those houses.
yeah, because I know they're not on this list.
Correct. That-
Yeah. So it just seems like there's quite a, there are probably, a minority of people who either through apathy or stubbornness go through this entire
Well,
process.
I think,
Clean, that's extraordinary.
I think, John, correct me if I'm wrong, I just saw the list from last night, but it appears that all those people who are on that list are continuing to gain an economic advantage every day.
Precisely. That's the managers.
And that may be why it may be, in the town's interest to escalate the matter.
So really, that's an appropriate segue. We had previously identified for the town council the largest amount of accrued fines and liens that are out there, and explained the circumstances. And again, that's set forth again in this memo, that again, by and large, all of them continue to violate the code and to be in violation of the special magistrate's order. In some instances, the accrued fines were fixed, and some have continuing accruals, and they're in violation of those orders, and they continue to accrue. So while we've set forth each property what the accrued fine was as of the date that the lien was recorded, and kind of give you a total at the end, it's actually larger than that because of those accruals, because most of these have been past that date for compliance for over a year, so they've accrued significant fines. And to the point of that you asked us is that all of the properties that are listed, except for I believe 2, are unencumbered by any other liens or mortgages. So if the council were to direct staff to initiate code enforcement, foreclosure proceedings, we would have priority. So really, the purpose of the memo is to get some direction whether or not the council wants us to proceed for injunctive relief, where we simply go to court to get a court order from circuit court judge saying you have to comply with this order or the risk of potentially being held in contempt, or we force the issue by filing a foreclosure action on the code enforcement liens, saying if you don't take care of this, we're going to take the property.
Mr. Herron,
Yes, ma'am.
now that you have created this document and it's going to be a public record,
Yes, ma'am.
can't these folks just go out and take out a mortgage on their property now?
No, they can, but it won't have priority over our liens.
I wanted to make that clear. And will we
Yes.
be able to seek attorney fees for?
Well, generally in foreclosure proceedings, there's an attorney fees provision in the mortgage. We don't have that necessarily, but the flip side is that under state law, under what's called Section 57105, we can petition the court for our attorney's fees on the argument that issues here are clear cut. There's a code enforcement order that hasn't been complied with, was never appealed, it's final, it's dispositive, and we're just seeking to foreclose on the liens as allowed by state law, and as a result, we should be entitled to our attorney's fees. There is a certain amount of discretion in the courts to determine that there are no issues in dispute that would warrant the awarding of attorney's fees. But we certainly would pursue that.
And if we ask you to pursue these 5, do we specifically have to instruct you that we want to pursue the attorney fees? Or do you do that automatically?
It never hurts to include that as part of the direction.
Okay. And because this is a management and planning meeting, we can't vote to do that today.
That is correct. But
I
we can
guess
place
I
it
would-
on the agenda for the next meeting.
I'd like to by consensus, ask that we put this on the agenda for a vote at the next meeting.
I would
And
agree.
John, if you could remind us that I mentioned the attorney fees thing, if you want that to
ma'am.
be part of the motion.
I would agree.
I agree also.
Consent.
Yep, I agree also. John, can you just to help enlighten me a little bit of how this
Yes.
process would work? So say the council will move forward with instructing you to begin the foreclosure procedures. What's to stop, or can the property owner then say, I'll just pay the fine and now comply with what I've been violating, and that stops that?
No, because the underlying, under our code, each day that goes by, it's a continuing fine, it's a continuing violation. And it's, you know, you can't pay it off, without it starting over just the next day. As long as you're in violation, there's a continuing basis to assert that there's a valid basis to continue with the foreclosure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I get that. I guess more what I'm trying to say is there a mediation process involved with the foreclosure?
Well, in virtually every court proceeding in Florida today, there's court-ordered mediation at some point. The idea, frankly, is back to the philosophy that was discussed before, which is hopefully by initiating the foreclosure proceedings, we make it clear to these property owners that that the town is serious about them coming into compliance, and that will get them to come into, it will begin that process, complete it, and then up to you all whether or not you decide, direct us then at that point in time, we report to you, they've brought it into compliance, do you want us to dismiss the foreclosure action?
Okay, that would be a best case scenario, right? I mean,
Yes. In a perfect world, that's how it would happen, and frankly, that's our hope.
And I'm just, again, this is for my education, hopefully the public's as well, not understanding the law as well as you do. So say the process gets started, moves into the foreclosure, goes through the process, they're not gonna comply, they don't wanna mediate, they don't wanna do anything, it comes to the end. And it's ruled that the town wins the case, then what happens?
The court will order a foreclosure sale, where anyone can bid on buying the property. And we would get, if the successful bidder is anything over our accrued lien, we get paid as part of that foreclosure. And then, you know, we would enter into an agreement with that new property owner to bring the property into compliance.
So would the fines continue, in worst case scenario like this, would the fines continue to accrue until the date of the sale?
Yeah, yes. Well, the court will set the amount in the foreclosure judgment, what the award of the foreclosure value is to us, and that would be the floor of the bidding, essentially.
And again, I apologize to my counselors, I may be monopolizing some of the time here, but
This is very educational.
Well, one last question is say you move forward with one of these properties, we decide we're gonna move forward with the foreclosure proceedings, they decide to come into compliance, everything gets worked out, fines get paid, whatever happens, what's to say they don't just start doing it again?
Well, that's inherent in any situation where you bring someone into compliance, that there's always the chance that they would engage in similar behavior. One would hope that after going through such a process and incurring the expense and ultimately the cost of complying, which may now be more than what it would have been had they done it initially, all that works as an incentive not to repeat.
Although I would say there's probably some examples here where it's more profitable to violate than to
Well,
And that's the distinction that, as we explained, between foreclosure versus injunctive relief, where the result of the injunctive relief is a court order. You know, you've ignored us, now are you going to ignore a judge who has the authority to hold you in contempt if you fail to comply with his order?
thank you, I appreciate you indulging me a little bit, because these are most certainly questions I'm gonna be asked, so Figure if they know it ahead of time.
But I would say, you know, to me, it seems like the foreclosure is a more direct path towards compliance than going through and getting an injunctive relief, says the court does this, and the court orders. It seems like there's multiple steps.
I've had success both ways. And one process isn't necessarily better than the other. I would say that my observation is that a circuit court order, for, a judge saying you got to comply or I'm going to hold you in contempt, and contempt may include either monetary fines or putting you in jail. It's a powerful incentive to get your property into compliance.
All right. I think you have your direction, John.
Yes, sir. I'll put it on the agenda.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. The last item, as always, is agenda management. Does anybody have anything they wish to bring forward?
Mr. Mayor, beyond just, perhaps adding items or prioritizing items, the other thing is if there's anything you want on a particular meeting date, for one reason or another, please let us know.
On that point, Mr. Town Manager, I think I sent Amy this note about, I think because we didn't have a formal membership in the TDC, the calendar wasn't adjusted for the first half of the year, but I think for the second half of the year, we have a conflict in December, and we're hoping to move one meeting. I don't expect you to know that off the top of your head, Amy. I'm looking in my notes as well. But I think it was the December 8th meeting. We have an M&P meeting on that Thursday at 9 o'clock. And the TDC also meets on that Thursday in December, and I'm wondering if we could either move that to Wednesday or Friday or whatever works best for the schedule.
And I'd certainly be in favor of moving that meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've done it in the past for the TDC conflicts.
Can everyone check their calendar and see if Wednesday is available the day before?
So that's Wednesday, December 7th?
7th, yeah, or the 9th, whatever works for people. We have a meeting on the 5th, a regular town meeting at 9 o'clock on the Monday of that week.
What was that date, month and date again?
It's December of 2022, and the conflict is on the 8th, which is that Thursday with the M&P. And so the ask is, could we either move it to the 6th, 7th, or 9th? Maybe not the 6th, maybe that's too close to the town meeting, but 7th or the 9th, the Wednesday or the Friday.
I'm okay with either one, that far out.
I'm getting a haircut on Wednesday. I'm okay with either one.
Which one?
Ooh.
Well, which hair?
Oh, I wasn't sure where that was going.
All right. Either one. Okay, anything else? Anybody? Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Hearing none, we'll adjourn at